Buddhism is one of the most ancient belief systems in the world.
Buddhism is both a religion and a philosophy. Only your own understanding saves you from suffering.
It is practiced by over 350 million people today.
There are many people who feel attracted to a religion which empowers the human individual.
I'm going to travel to 7 wonders of the Buddhist world. 7 wonders that give an insight to the long and rich history of Buddhism. At each location, I'll meet Buddhists who will help me to understand a different concept that forms the core of Buddhist belief. I'm going to explore how it started, where it travelled, and some of the most spectacular monuments built by Buddhists right across the globe. And to try to get to the bottom of the attraction of this philosophy for mankind for close on 2,500 years. Buddhism's numbers grow year on year, and I'll be uncovering why, as I experience 7 modern and ancient wonders of the Buddhist world. This is northeastern India, where Buddhism began around 500 years before Christ. Millions of pilgrims come to this country and to the sacred city of Bodh Gaya to visit the place where a young Indian prince underwent a life-changing personal transformation and came to be known as the Buddha. I've studied the period in history when the Buddha lived for over 20 years, and I just love it because this was such a radical age. This was a time when men like the Buddha and Socrates in ancient Greece turned the world of belief upside down. Instead of focusing on tradition and convention and ritual, they dealt with ethics and the possibilities of the human mind. And I'm particularly fascinated to follow in the trail of Buddhism because as the philosophy has travelled through 25 centuries, it's marked out a path that leads directly from ancient society to the modern world. This is Mahabodhi, the Great Awakening Temple in Bodh Gaya in northeastern India, our first wonder of the Buddhist world. The reason Bodh Gaya is here at all is because 2.5 millennia ago, one man had an internal, personal revelation while he sat underneath a peepal tree. It's a very quiet, simple beginning to end up with all of this. That man was called Siddhartha Gautama, and we're told he renounced his privileges and family to embark on a rigorous quest. A journey to understand the inherent challenges of the human condition, sparked by the suffering, sorrow and deprivation that he saw all around him. It was a long and difficult journey. Siddhartha renounced the comforts of the material world. He meditated for weeks on end. He broke with the status quo in a region that had been dominated by the old gods for the previous 1,000 years. Finally, he achieved nirvana, what we loosely translate as enlightenment, and became known as the Buddha, or the Enlightened One. The Buddha, according to Buddhist scriptures, made his way to this spot and determined not to move until he found an answer to the world's suffering. So it was here, on one warm spring evening, 2,500 years ago, that the Buddha came to sit. We're told that all night he was tormented by demons. But then as the sun began to rise in the east, he found enlightenment.
The Bodh Gaya temple is the Mecca of Buddhism. It is where the Buddha attained enlightenment, according to their belief. And the Bodhi tree, or a great-grandson of the Bodhi tree, still grows there. And so Buddhists go there to remember the great breakthrough that was the Buddha's discovery of the true nature of the universe.
And inspired by the Buddha's example, you'll find visitors here from every corner of the globe, from the 90 or so countries where Buddhism still flourishes today.
Bodh Gaya is one of the key sites for all Buddhists worldwide. It serves as a magnet, as a center point for Buddhists from around the world.
You could say it's the place exactly where Buddhism started.
I'm not a Buddhist, but if you ask anyone who's involved in Buddhism, they'll tell you that it's a very difficult philosophy to teach or to explain, and that the very best way to understand it is to experience it.
And so, by experiencing Buddhism, I'm going to try to get to the heart of a philosophy that can sometimes seem complicated, out of reach. And I'll start with the 3 key principles of Buddhism, what are known as its 3 jewels. The first is the life and example of Buddha himself. All Buddhists are encouraged to model their approach to life on his.
The most important single point in the Buddha's teaching, and one which distinguishes it very sharply from other religions, is that the Buddha taught that each of us is entirely and solely responsible for our own lives and our own salvation. No one else can be responsible.
The Buddha didn't claim any divine status, nor did he profess to be a personal saviour. He called himself a guide and a teacher. His message appealed to people of all social classes in ancient India, to merchants, to farmers, and to the untouchable caste.
The Buddha, in the course of his spiritual awakening, rejected a good number of aspects of Hinduism. He rejected some philosophical components of Hindu beliefs. He was very critical of the position of the Brahmins or priests in society at that time, which was a very elitist position. He was similarly critical of the caste system. He positioned himself as a result outside the caste system.
The Buddha spent his remaining years travelling through deep forests, across mango groves, from village to village. The curious would bring food and clothing for the philosopher and his band of followers, and in turn, he encouraged them to reconsider the purpose and point of life, to recalibrate their moral compass. Although the Buddha didn't establish a church or temple system as such, over time, the significant locations in his life were gradually turned into shrines. Originally, Bodh Gaya was just a pastoral sanctuary, marked out with a stone balustrade 200 years or so after his death. But by the 6th century AD, a full-blown temple, the Mahabodhi temple, marked the spot.
About 400 years after the first temple that was built here for the worshipping of the Bodhi tree was replaced by this kind of a temple built to enshrine the iconic image of Buddha, which had gained currency by that time. The temple, particularly the Mahabodhi temple, is representative of how important Buddhist temples were and how, this idea of building a temple to enshrine statues started from here.
As Buddhism's travelled through the centuries, perhaps inevitably it's taken on more the aspect of a religion with temples and pilgrims and a religious hierarchy. You could be forgiven for mistaking Buddhism as one of the great God-driven faiths of the world, but there is a key difference. By putting such an emphasis on a system of personal morality and breaking with the conventions and traditions and rituals of the past, in many ways, the Buddha was one of those men who gave us the modern world. And although he never denied that there were gods, he simply said, You don't have to rely on the gods to make everything okay.
According to Buddhist sources, having seeded a radical new world view, the Buddha died at the age of 84. His body was cremated, but his bones remained unburned.